Snow whipped sideways, stinging Eli Turner's face as he struggled to see more than a few feet ahead. The storm hit the mountain like a beast unleashed. Wind howled through the pines, tearing branches from the trees as if the forest itself was screaming. His lantern flickered violently, its light fighting against the darkness that pressed in from every direction. Somewhere in that chaos, beneath the roar of the wind, came another sound, a faint cry, raw and haunting. It wasn't human. It was the desperate whimper of something trapped, something in pain. Eli's heart pounded. He knew he should turn back before the storm buried him alive. But that sound, it pulled at something deep inside him, something he'd tried for years to bury. "God help me," he muttered, forcing his way through the snow toward the sound. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The storm began earlier that afternoon, crawling over the ridgeline like a gray ghost. By the time Eli left his cabin, the light was already fading, the air heavy with the scent of frozen pine. He hadn't meant to go far, just to fetch wood from the old shed by the stream. But then he'd heard that cry. It was faint, carried by the wind, yet there was something unmistakably real in it. Fear. Eli had lived in these mountains his entire life. He knew the language of the woods, the moan of bending trees, the groan of ice splitting on the river, the warning call of a raven when danger loomed. But this sound was different. It wasn't a predator hunting. It was a creature begging. He pushed deeper into the storm, boots sinking into snow up to his knees. His breath came out in harsh clouds, his coat stiff with frost. Lightning flashed, revealing jagged cliffs and skeletal trees. Then, there it was again. Louder this time. Eli followed the sound to a clearing between two ridges. The lantern's weak glow brushed against something metallic, chains. His chest tightened. Two wolves lay there, tethered to a fallen log, their bodies barely moving. One was a full-grown gray, its fur matted with blood and ice. The other was a pup, so small its ribs showed through the skin. For a long moment, Eli just stood there, the storm screaming around him. The larger wolf lifted its head, eyes blazing gold in the lantern light. It snarled, teeth bared, protecting its young even in near death. Eli raised a gloved hand slowly. "Easy, I'm not here to hurt you." The wind tore his words away, but he spoke anyway, his voice trembling with something between fear and pity. The wolf's growl faded into a low rumble. Eli knelt, snow soaking through his pants, and examined the chains. Thick, iron. The kind used by trappers or, he swallowed hard, soldiers. The realization hit him like a blow. He'd heard rumors in town, patrol units using wolves as bait to draw others out. Cruel entertainment for bored men with rifles. He thought it was just talk. Now he was staring at the truth. The pup whimpered weakly. Eli's pulse raced. He knew he couldn't break those chains alone. Not tonight. Not in this storm. But he also couldn't walk away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a strip of dried venison, laying it carefully on the snow between them. The adult wolf's nostrils flared. Hunger battled distrust in its eyes. Slowly, it crawled forward, teeth still bared, until its jaws closed around the meat. It tore off a piece, then nudged the rest toward the pup. That simple act, the way the creature fed its young first, made Eli's throat tighten. He whispered, "You've got more heart than most men I know." The wolf looked at him, as if it understood. For an instant, the space between man and beast vanished. Two survivors, both chained by things they couldn't control. Thunder cracked overhead. Eli flinched and looked back toward the trees. He couldn't stay long. The snow was rising fast, and night was closing in. He had to leave before the storm swallowed him whole. But as he turned away, the pup cried again, a small, broken sound that pierced straight through him. Eli clenched his fists. Every instinct screamed for him to keep walking, to pretend he hadn't seen this. Yet the memory of another winter, years ago, came rushing back. Another wolf, another cry, and a gunshot he'd never forgiven himself for. He glanced over his shoulder. The two wolves were watching him, eyes glowing in the dark. "I'll be back," he promised. "Tomorrow I'll bring tools, I swear it." Then he forced himself to leave, retracing his steps through the blizzard. The mountain roared behind him like a living thing, as if warning him that mercy was a dangerous path. When he finally reached the cabin, his mother was waiting by the fire. Martha Turner, frail but sharp-eyed, studied the snow caked on his coat. "You went out in that storm?" Eli hesitated, pulling off his gloves. "I heard something out there." "What kind of something?" He looked into the fire, watching the flames dance like ghosts. "Wolves." Her expression hardened, a mix of fear and sorrow. "You don't need that trouble again, Eli. The forest's full of spirits that don't forgive." He smiled faintly. "Maybe they just need someone to listen." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters like bones. Martha sighed, knowing that tone in her son's voice. He had made up his mind. There was no stopping him. That night, long after she'd gone to bed, Eli sat by the window, staring into the storm. He could still hear the faint echo of that cry, like a heartbeat in the wind. He didn't know what awaited him at dawn, whether salvation or disaster, but something deep in his soul whispered that his life would never be the same. Far up in the canyon, under a dying tree, two wolves huddled together against the cold, and for the first time in days, they were not afraid. Dawn came brittle and pale, the kind of cold that cracked bark and glassed the creek in a single sheet of frost. Eli woke before the light had climbed past the ridge, his breath a ghost above the blanket. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and the herb satchel his mother kept near the stove. Dried willow bark, pine resin, crushed spruce tips, and strips of clean linen folded with a care that had outlasted many winters. He dressed in silence, layering wool over flannel, pulling on boots stiff with yesterday's snow. Martha stirred when the door latch clicked. "Eli?" she called softly, voice thinned by age but steadied by resolve. "You're going back." He paused with a length of rope in his hands. "I said I would." Her eyes, the color of old glass, studied him a moment. "Take the kettle water. It's still warm. Wrap it in the spare scarf. It'll keep your hands from freezing on the iron." He nodded, surprised at the way her consent made the room warmer. She rose, leaning on the table, and handed him a tin of salve the color of moss. "For infection," she said. "If they'll let you near." "Thank you." "Be careful of men," she added, lower still. "Animals I trust." Men. Less so outside. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a sky of washed pewter. The woods were soundless in that particular way, mourning sometimes as after violence, stunned, waiting. Eli strapped the small hammer and cold chisel to his belt, tucked the salve and linen under his coat, and set out. Each breath cut his throat clean. The world glittered with ice burrs and snow feathers. The only motion was his own steam and the soft tumble of powder off a pine he brushed as he passed. He followed his tracks from the night before, now hardened into shallow troughs. The mountain rose, then folded down into the narrow gullet of the canyon. When he reached the clearing, The chains were the first thing that caught the light, dull silver against bark. The iron links rhymed with ice. The wolves were there. He'd feared they might be dead, that his promise had been too small against the storm. But the adult, Greyheart, the thought arrived unbidden, lifted his head and fixed Eli with those ember-yellow eyes. The pup lay half-curled against the log, ribs fluttering under thin fur. But when Eli knelt, the little body trembled with a spark that meant life. He set the kettle-warm water on the snow, uncorked it, and blew across the surface. Steam drifted toward Greyheart. His nostrils flared. "Easy," Eli said, though the wind carried his words apart like ash. He took off his gloves, flexed his fingers to bring feeling to them, and poured a trickle over the frozen clasp. A faint crackle answered as ice surrendered to heat. The adult's lips lifted once, sheer reflex, then settled. The chain at his neck had rubbed fur raw along the collarbone. Beneath the coarse gray coat, the pulse ran frantic but steady. Eli spoke as he worked, not for meaning, but to lay down a rhythm that said he would not harm. "This is only water," he murmured, "and there's salve and food if you can keep it down." The pup's eyes flickered. Eli tore a strip of jerky with his teeth and softened it in the steam, holding it close enough for the warmth to cling. Greyheart watched, muscles coiled, his own restraint the only thing between Eli's hand and teeth that could break bone. When Eli set the softened meat within reach, the adult nosed it, then pushed it toward the pup. The small mouth opened, clumsy and hungry, and the sound it made, half whimper, half swallow, stung Eli's eyes in a way the wind could not. Minutes passed in that fragile truce. The water loosened ice from iron. The salve turned slick in Eli's palm as he warmed it, then laid it gently along the pup's chafed leg. He wrapped the limb in linen, the strip binding snug but not cruel. When he reached for the collar wound at the adult's throat, Greyheart's body went carved still. Eli held his hand in the air, open, asking permission with the patience of the woods themselves. The wolf blinked, then dipped his head a fraction, a concession carved from pain. Eli worked quickly, smearing salve where iron had eaten flesh, the smell of resin and crushed leaf mixing with the cold, clean air. It was the crunch of a boot that broke the moment. Eli stiffened, fingers still on the wolf's neck. He didn't need to turn to know who stood at the tree line. Jonas Reed moved like a man who'd been taught when to be seen and when not to be, deliberate, plain, never a surprise unless he wished it. His hat brim threw his eyes into shade, but Eli could feel the conflict there before the first word. "You have a gift for finding trouble," Jonas said without rancor. His breath plumed, then vanished. Eli resumed, smoothing the last of the salve. "I heard them yesterday. Couldn't leave them, I can see that." Jonas took 2 steps closer, careful, hands lifted a little from his sides so the wolves could read him. "Those aren't trapper chains. Military stock. You know what that means." Eli did. He had known the moment his fingers met that stubborn iron. He stood and faced his friend fully, aware of the precarious balance at his back. "I know. You helped them," Jonas said. "And you cross a line. The patrol has orders this winter. Wolves threaten the calves coming through from the valley. Ranchers complain. Men like Cole listen. Men like Cole like to make proof of their power," Eli replied, voice level. "Even when the world doesn't need proving." Jonas's mouth tugged. "He's angrier this year. Something with his family. He's been on the ridge, twice. I saw his horse prints 2 days ago." He scanned the clearing. His gaze lingered on the lantern soot, the wet dark where Eli had poured water. If he's watching, he'll have seen you. Then he's seen me keep something alive. That isn't the kind of alive he's paid for. Jonas glanced at the pup, at the careful linen. When he looked back, there was a plea under the practical talk. Listen. If you're set on this, at least be smart. Work at dawn or in weather so rough no one's up here. Don't leave sign, don't bring anything you can't carry out. And for God's sake, Eli, don't let your tracks lead straight back to your door. Eli nodded once. Jonas had always been like this. No lectures, just the map of a safer path through a country that didn't forgive fools. Thank you. Jonas hesitated, then reached into his coat and produced a small key ring, old and simple, a relic from some logging chain long retired. Might not fit, he said, but men reuse old keys for new locks more than you'd think. And if it doesn't, file the teeth. I'll leave the hand file by the cedar stump above your place. Eli took the keys, metal burning cold against his palm. Gratitude and worry struck him at once. If Cole learns you helped... Jonas cut him off with a shake of his head. Then I'll say I didn't. I'm good at looking like I didn't. He tipped his hat at the wolves. They bite, I'll pretend not to blame you. When Jonas left, his tracks stitched the snow for only a dozen yards before he took to an older trail and disappeared like he'd never been there. Eli stood a moment, the clearing settling around him again, the wolves breathing the only sound besides the creek's muted rattle under ice. He knelt and worked at the lock. The second key slipped, then snagged, then refused. The third went in halfway and stuck. He drew it out, rubbed it in the warm water, tried again. It turned a fraction, stopped, then gave another quarter turn with a stubborn click that was not the sound of release, but of promise. The chain rattled, a note different enough to make the pup's ears perk. Tomorrow, Eli murmured to the iron as if it were a mule that might be coaxed. Tomorrow we try again. He fed them once more before he left, this time setting down a small round of bone marrow he'd saved. Greyheart's eyes softened by a degree he would not have believed a wolf's eyes could. Eli rose, gathered the kettle and linen scraps, and swept his glove over the bare patch where he'd worked, scuffing away his prints until the snow was a single unbroken skin. On the ridge above, a man lowered his field glass. Captain Henry Cole had the lean face of someone carved by wind and grief, and the glass had been steady in his hand, even as the cold gnawed through the glove. He had watched enough, watched the way the mountain man did not flinch, the way the wolf did not strike, the way a promise had been made in a language older than the one he spoke. The anger he wore like a uniform tightened across his chest. "Sir?" One of the younger patrolmen breathed behind him, breath fogging the eyepiece before Cole could pocket it. "Do we move in?" "Not today," Cole said, each word clipped to keep them warm. He turned his horse with a pressure of knee and rein, and the animal obeyed because obedience was all it had been taught. "Some debts collect more interest if you wait." Back at the cabin, Martha had set a pot to simmer. Thyme stem and onion peel perfumed the room. Eli set the tools on the table and thawed his hands by the stove. He did not tell her about Jonas or the keys. She had always known more than men told, and telling would not change what must be done. "You'll need stronger tea for the morning," she said, as if she had read the next page of his intentions. "The kind that keeps you standing when the ground won't." "I'll brew it before light." Eli looked at her, the lines at the corners of her mouth deeper this winter than the last. "You don't have to." "I like to," she said, and that was the end of it. Night put its weight on the hills. The wind dropped away, leaving a hum the trees made when only owls and foxes were moving. Eli oiled the hammerhead, filed the third key just enough to change the bite, and pulled a blanket over his knees while he worked. He thought of Greyheart's guard-raised head, of the pup's awkward mouth on softened meat. He thought of Jonas disappearing into the snow as if warning, friend, and shadow all at once. Somewhere on the ridge a horse snorted. Somewhere closer, an icicle cracked and fell. Before sleep took him, he set the keys on the sill where frost could not find them. He was not a man given to prayer. He had always believed in the practicality of hands. But as the last of the fire sank into orange coals, he made a wish anyway, not on heaven, but on the simple miracle of another morning. And in the raw gray hour before dawn, when the mountain draws breath and the world balances between what was and what might be, Eli rose, took the filed key, and stepped outside. The air carried a dry, iron smell, like the taste of a blade. Far off, a raven called once and was answered. In the canyon, two hearts beat faster without knowing why. Above them, unseen in the dim, a second pair of eyes marked the path he chose, measuring the length of his mercy against the reach of the law. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, iron turning or rifles raised. But today would carry the work one turn further, the lock a fraction looser. The distance between fear and trust narrowed by the width of a man's hand. And that small narrowing, almost nothing to speak of, was how stories in these mountains changed from one kind of winter to another. The next morning arrived in a hush of silver light, the kind that makes every pine needle gleam like glass. Eli woke before dawn, heart heavy with the promise he had made. The key Jonas gave him lay on the windowsill, catching the faint blue of morning. He slipped it into his pocket, wrapped his coat tight, and stepped into the cold. His mother was already awake. Martha sat near the stove, stirring a pot of tea, her thin hands wrapped in wool gloves with the fingertips cut off. "You're leaving early again," she said, not looking at him. "I have work in the canyon," Eli replied quietly. She poured the tea into a tin cup, her expression unreadable. "Then drink this first. It's bitter, but it'll keep you standing." He nodded, took a sip, and winced. "That's the point, isn't it?" A small smile creased her lips. "You take after your father more than you know." Eli wanted to ask what she meant, but the words fell away. He kissed her forehead, then stepped outside, his boots crunching through the snow. The wind had softened overnight, but the air held a sharpness that warned of more storms to come. He followed the narrow trail toward the canyon, the same path he had taken twice before. The trees whispered with a strange stillness, as though they too were waiting. When he reached the clearing, he froze. The wolves were gone. His heart stopped for a breath. Then he saw movement, a flicker of gray near the rock wall. The chains were still there, but slack. The adult wolf, Greyheart, had shifted position, lying protectively over the pup. The snow around them was marked with blood and claw prints. Something had happened in the night. Eli dropped to his knees, scanning the ground. Boot tracks. 3 pairs. Not his. Not Jonas's. The prints were fresh, pressed deep into the snow. Soldiers. His stomach tightened. They had come close. Too close. Greyheart's golden eyes met his. The animal's chest rose and fell fast, but the growl never came. Eli took the key from his pocket and moved carefully, one step at a time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have come sooner." The lock was stiff from frost. He slid the key in, turned it. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. He exhaled slowly, forced calm into his hands, and filed the edge with the small piece of metal Jonas had given him. The third attempt brought a faint, blessed click. The sound startled the pup, who whimpered and tried to stand. Eli set a steady hand on its side. "Easy there, little one." "Almost done." When the second lock gave way, the chain dropped into the snow like a dead snake. Greyheart flinched, then looked at him, uncertain of what freedom meant. Eli backed away, giving space. "Go," he said softly. "You're free." But the wolves didn't move. Greyheart stood, shaky but fierce, his gaze darting to the edge of the clearing, the pup pressed against his legs. That's when Eli saw it, the glint of metal among the trees, a rifle barrel. He ducked instinctively, pulling his coat tight around his shoulders. "Damn it!" 3 figures emerged from the pines. The man in front wore a dark coat trimmed in fur and carried authority like another weapon. Captain Henry Cole. "Well," Cole said, voice calm but sharp, "the ghost of these mountains shows himself." Eli rose slowly, hands away from his sides. "You don't need to do this, Captain." Cole smirked. "Don't I? You're trespassing on restricted ground. Those wolves are bait for military operations. And you? Well, you're about to ruin a week's worth of planning." "They're living creatures, not traps," Eli replied. His pulse hammered, but his voice stayed even. "If you've ever lost something you loved, you'd understand." Cole's jaw twitched. "You think I don't understand loss?" He stepped closer, his men following. The wolves tensed, Greyheart's muscles rippling under his fur. Eli held out a hand, signaling the animal to stay calm. "I know what you lost," Eli said, guessing more than knowing. "A child, maybe. Someone torn from you. But killing everything wild won't bring them back." Cole's eyes flashed with sudden fury. "My sister," he hissed. "She was 7. Wolves took her from our yard. I found what was left." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush breath. Eli swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for her. Truly. But these wolves aren't the ones who did it. They're starving, chained, beaten." "Because that's what keeps the others away," Cole snapped. "Fear. Pain. It's all that works." He lifted his rifle. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. Eli stepped forward, placing himself between Cole and the wolves. "Shoot me if you have to," he said. "But you'll have to look me in the eyes when you do it." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, from the corner of his vision, Eli saw Greyheart rise. The wolf's fur bristled. A low rumble built in his chest. Cole turned the barrel toward the sound. "Stop!" Eli shouted, but it was too late. Greyheart lunged. The chain clattered behind him as the last link snapped. The wolf collided with Cole's rifle, knocking it aside. A shot rang out, shattering the silence and scattering birds from the trees. Eli threw himself forward, tackling one of the younger soldiers before the man could fire again. The rifle discharged into the snow, sending up a cloud of white and smoke. When the echo died, Eli realized no one else was shooting. Greyheart stood between him and Cole, teeth bared, the captain frozen, his face ghost pale. The wolf hadn't attacked, only blocked him, protecting Eli. Cole's breath came in ragged bursts. He looked down at the rifle, then at the man he had nearly killed. "You've gone mad," he whispered. "Maybe," Eli said, chest heaving. "Or maybe I just remembered what it means to care." For a long moment, Cole didn't move. Then he lowered the gun and stepped back. "Take them," he said quietly. "But if I see you near this canyon again, I won't miss." Eli nodded once, not trusting his voice. Cole motioned to his men, and the three disappeared into the trees, their boots crunching in retreat. Eli turned to the wolves. Greyheart stood tall now, chest rising with exhaustion, but pride too. The pup pressed against his leg. The snow around them was trampled, streaked with powder and smoke. Eli knelt. "We have to leave." Tonight he gathered the chain, coiling it around his arm. The wolves followed as he led them into the narrow pass north of the clearing. Above them, clouds gathered again, dimming what little light remained. Halfway up the ridge, Eli stopped to catch his breath. He looked back. The clearing below lay empty, silent, but he knew Cole's threat was not a bluff. Something in the man's eyes, some old grief, was still alive, waiting for another reason to strike. Eli turned away and pressed on. By the time they reached the hidden cave behind the frozen waterfall, night had fallen. He spread his coat on the cold stone and set the pup down gently. "Rest here," he whispered. Greyheart circled once, then lay beside the pup, eyes still fixed on the entrance. Eli leaned against the wall, breath visible in the dark. His heart ached with relief and fear all at once. He had done it, freed them. But he had also crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the distant sound of a horn, one long, mournful note echoing through the valley. Soldiers were coming back. Eli's hand tightened around the cold chisel at his belt. "Not tonight," he murmured. "Not again." Greyheart lifted his head, as if he understood. The pup whined softly and pressed closer to its father. In that small, flickering cave light, man and beast waited together, bound now by something stronger than fear, by the promise of survival, and by the shadow of what the next day would bring. Far below, in the barracks at the edge of the valley, Captain Cole stood by the window, staring into the storm. The shot still echoed in his mind, along with the image of the wolf shielding the man he was supposed to condemn. He poured himself a drink, but the whiskey burned too hot to swallow. He whispered to the empty room, "What kind of man does a beast trust over me?" And in the silence that followed, he had no answer. The morning broke with a thin ribbon of light spilling across the mouth of the cave. Eli woke to the low hum of the wind moving through the canyon, the sound soft as breath against stone. His body ached from the cold, but his mind was sharper than ever. The wolves were still there. Greyheart lying close to the pup, both asleep but restless, twitching with the echoes of last night's chaos. Eli brushed frost from his beard and listened. The valley was quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. He rose, stretching the stiffness from his back. His breath fogged the air. The fire he had built during the night had burned to ash, leaving only a faint trace of warmth. He needed food, both for himself and for the wolves, and more than that, he needed a plan. Captain Cole's warning still echoed in his mind. He knew men like Cole didn't make idle threats. The captain would come back, and next time he wouldn't miss. Eli crouched near the wolves, careful not to startle them. The pup, Ash, stirred first, blinking with sleepy confusion before crawling toward him. The little creature's fur had begun to thicken, the wound on its leg healing faster than he'd hoped. Greyheart lifted his head next, amber eyes locking with Eli's. There was no aggression in them anymore, only the wary understanding of two beings who had shared danger and survived it. Eli whispered, "We'll have to move north today. There's an old ridge trail above the timberline, harder to track, colder too, but safer." The wolf blinked slowly, as if he understood. Eli took it as a sign. He gathered his tools, wrapped his scarf tight, and stepped outside the cave. The sun hung low behind the clouds, pale and unfriendly. Snow sparkled in hard layers, the kind that crunched loud underfoot, bad for hiding tracks. From the cave entrance, Eli could see miles of untouched wilderness, the kind of beauty that could kill a man if he stayed too long. He climbed a few paces higher to scout. In the distance, down near the valley road, faint columns of smoke rose into the sky. Campfires. Soldiers. He counted at least 2 plumes. They were moving in a search pattern, sweeping the lower trails. Cole was wasting no time. Eli cursed under his breath and slid back down toward the cave. Greyheart was already standing, nose tilted toward the wind, sensing what Eli had seen. The pup pressed close to its father's leg. "They're coming," Eli said quietly. "We leave now." He gathered what little food he had left, jerky, bread, and a small flask of water, and packed it in a satchel. He opened the coat wide, gesturing for the pup to climb in. Ash hesitated, then nestled against his chest, trembling from the cold. Greyheart followed behind as they began the climb. The ridge trail wound steeply upward, bordered by jagged rocks and twisted pines that creaked under the weight of snow. Every few steps, Eli paused to look back. His breath came in sharp bursts. Behind them, far below, figures appeared. 3 soldiers on horseback, dark against the white. "Damn it," he muttered. Greyheart turned, hackles raised. Eli motioned him forward. "No, we keep moving." They pushed higher, the air thinning and colder with each step. The wind tore through his coat like knives. When they reached the crest of the ridge, Eli spotted a cluster of fallen trees ahead, their trunks leaning together like bones, perfect cover. He slipped between them, crouching low. Greyheart crouched beside him, silent and still, watching the soldiers draw closer through the trees below. Eli counted the riders again. Cole was at the front, his coat flapping in the wind, face hard as the rock beneath his horse's hooves. The soldiers slowed at the base of the ridge, scanning for tracks. Eli held his breath. One of them dismounted and pointed toward the snow where Eli's trail vanished beneath the fallen pines. Cole followed his gesture but didn't move forward. Instead, he raised a hand, signaling the others to stay back. Cole dismounted, boots crunching against the ice. He stood still, listening. Then, to Eli's shock, he called out, "Turner!" His voice carried up the ridge, cutting through the wind like a blade. "You've got one chance to walk out alive. Bring me the wolves, and this ends clean." Eli didn't move. He felt Greyheart's breath beside him, hot and steady. The pup squirmed faintly inside his coat, sensing tension. Cole's tone hardened. "You can't hide forever. This land belongs to the government. You and those animals are trespassing." Eli clenched his jaw, anger burning in his chest. "You don't own this mountain," he muttered under his breath. Cole shouted again, "Do you hear me, Turner? Those wolves aren't your salvation. They're your end." Eli closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay quiet. The soldiers below shifted uneasily, the horses stamping. Cole stared up at the ridge a moment longer, then turned sharply. "Search the western side," he ordered. "If he's up there, the snow will tell us soon enough." The men rode off, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. Cole lingered a moment, scanning the cliffs, then followed. Eli waited until the sound disappeared completely. Only then did he exhale. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that hadn't yet faded. He looked at Greyheart. "They'll circle back. We can't stay here long." The wolf blinked once as though agreeing. Eli rose and began to move again, heading toward the northern slope. The climb grew steeper and the snow deeper, swallowing his boots with every step. His lungs burned from the thin air. Hours later, they reached a narrow plateau, a stretch of ground hidden between cliffs. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter from the wind. Eli built a small fire, shielding the flame with a rock wall. The warmth spread slowly, melting the frost from his gloves. The pup crawled out of his coat and curled by the fire, yawning. He fed Greyheart a strip of jerky, then leaned back against the stone. Exhaustion weighed on him like the snow itself. For the first time since the storm, he felt a flicker of something close to peace, until he saw the reflection. A faint glint of glass from across the valley, too deliberate to be sunlight on ice. A spyglass. Someone was watching. Eli's pulse quickened. He stood, peering into the distance. The glint vanished, but he didn't need to see more. Cole hadn't given up. He sat back down, eyes fixed on the fire. "They'll find us again," he whispered. "They always do." Martha's voice echoed in his memory. "Be careful of men. Animals I trust. Men, less so." He looked at Greyheart. The wolf's gaze met his steadily, calm, unflinching. There was something almost human in that stare. A question, maybe even trust. Eli reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over the wolf's head. "We'll make it through this. I don't know how, but we will." Outside the circle of firelight, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke. Faint, but familiar. Cole's men were closer than he'd hoped. Eli doused the flame with snow and gathered his pack. The wolves followed silently. They moved into the darkness again, away from warmth and safety, guided only by instinct and the dim pull of survival. Far below, Captain Cole closed his spyglass. His jaw tightened as he turned to his men. "He's heading north," he said. "Let him run. The mountain will do the work for us," but even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. Something about the image of that man standing beside a wild beast wouldn't leave him. As night swallowed the mountain, both hunter and hunted moved deeper into its heart, each haunted by a past they couldn't bury, and by a truth neither yet understood, that the line between man and beast was far thinner than either dared to believe. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing the mountains in silence. By dawn, the world had turned white again, tracks buried, scent erased, time suspended. Eli woke stiff and cold beneath a narrow overhang, his coat crusted with frost. The fire he had built the night before had died hours ago, leaving nothing but the faint glow of embers and the wolves' slow, steady breathing beside him. He lay still for a long while, listening to the wind moan through the pines. Greyheart was awake already, head lifted, nose twitching toward the open valley. Ash slept curled against his father's flank, chest rising and falling in the rhythm of dreamless exhaustion. Eli sat up, rubbed the stiffness from his arms, and stared into the pale morning light. The horizon was blurred with fog. Somewhere beyond it, Captain Cole's men would be moving, cautious, methodical, determined. He had bought them a little time, maybe a day at most. But time was a fragile thing on these mountains. He gathered his pack, checked the rope and tools, and stepped outside the shelter. The cold hit him like a slap. The air smelled clean, almost metallic. He scanned the ridge below. No movement, no sound, only the whisper of snow shifting over rock. When he turned back, Greyheart was standing at the entrance, watching him. Their eyes met for a heartbeat that said more than words could carry. "I know," Eli murmured. "We can't keep running." He knelt, drawing lines in the snow with a stick. Paths, directions, trails he knew by heart. "There's an old ranger outpost 2 miles north. If we make it there, maybe we can hold them off, or at least get some cover." Greyheart tilted his head as though listening, and Eli smiled faintly. "You'd make a good scout." He called softly to Ash, who yawned, shook snow from his fur, and limped toward him. The pup's leg had healed enough to bear weight, but the wound still slowed him. Eli lifted the little wolf, settling him inside his coat again. Then the three of them began the climb. The day stretched gray and long. Clouds pressed low against the ridge, and the light turned flat, erasing all depth. More than once Eli stopped, squinting, uncertain if the next step was solid ground or a sheet of ice waiting to betray him. Hours passed before they saw the cabin, a dark smudge against the white slope. Its roof sagged beneath years of snow, but the chimney was still intact. Relief flickered through Eli's chest. Shelter. He pushed through the door with his shoulder. The hinges groaned. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the smell of dust and old smoke. A wood stove sat cold in the corner. Empty shelves lined the walls, except for a cracked lantern and a single, forgotten blanket. "It'll do," Eli whispered. He unpacked what little he had left and set about building a fire. Greyheart paced the perimeter, sniffing every shadow, tail stiff with alertness. When the first spark caught, warmth began to seep into the air. The sound of crackling wood felt almost human. Eli fed Ash a piece of dried meat, then sat near the fire himself, hands trembling slightly from fatigue. He could feel the weight of the last few days pressing down on him. The storm, the chase, the killing cold. He thought of Martha, of how she must be waiting, looking out her window at the snow, praying he'd come home. But deep down, he knew she would already understand. His mother had always known where compassion led, and how costly it could be. He stared into the fire. "I've done it again, haven't I?" he murmured to himself. "Gotten too close. Chased mercy into the jaws of something I can't control." Greyheart settled beside him, silent, a steady presence that asked for nothing. Eli reached out and brushed the wolf's fur. "You and I are both fools," he said softly. "But maybe the world needs fools more than it needs soldiers." The warmth lulled him. He didn't know how long he drifted, but the sound that woke him was unmistakable, distant hoofbeats. He froze. Greyheart's head snapped up, ears pricked, body tense. The rhythm came again, closer this time, muffled by the snow but steady. Eli's pulse spiked. He doused the fire with a handful of snow and motioned for the wolves to stay quiet. He moved to the window and peered through a crack in the wood. 3 riders were coming up the ridge, and at their head was Henry Cole. Eli's heart hammered. He could see the captain's face now, hard and pale beneath his hat, eyes sharp with purpose. The soldiers dismounted near a fallen pine and began scanning the area. Cole looked directly toward the cabin, as if drawn by instinct. Eli whispered, "He's found us." He turned to Greyheart. "Go," he urged. "Take the pup and run." But the wolf didn't move. He stood his ground, fur bristling, eyes burning gold. Eli swallowed hard. "Please, if they find you, they'll shoot. You understand that?" Still no movement. Outside, Cole shouted to his men, "Search the cabin!" Eli's heart kicked against his ribs. He looked around the room. There was no back door, no cellar, nowhere to hide. Only the narrow chimney and the snow-choked window. The first soldier reached the porch. The door shuddered under his boot. Eli grabbed the poker from the stove and stepped in front of the wolves. "Stay behind me." The door burst open. The soldier stumbled inside and froze. The sight before him was something out of nightmare. A wild-eyed man standing in the firelight's ghostly glow, a great gray wolf at his side, teeth bared in a soundless snarl. Before the soldier could react, Greyheart lunged, not for the kill, just enough to knock him back into the snow. The man screamed and fired blindly. The shot went wide, ricocheting off the stove with a metallic clang. Cole's voice rang out. "Hold your fire!" He stepped into the doorway, rifle lowered, his face unreadable. Snow blew around him like ashes. "Eli Turner," he said, calm and cold. "You've caused quite a stir." Eli's grip tightened on the poker. "You don't need to do this, don't I?" Cole took a slow step forward. "You freed government property. You interfered with military operations. And you've been harboring dangerous animals." "They're not dangerous," Eli snapped. "They're starving." "You chained them to die," Cole's expression darkened. "You think the world's that simple? You think mercy keeps you alive in a land like this?" Eli's voice rose. "Maybe not. But it's the only thing that makes life worth surviving." For a moment, the two men just stared at each other, fire and frost locked in the narrow cabin. Then Cole raised his rifle, but hesitated. His eyes flicked to Greyheart, who had stepped forward to stand between them. Something shifted in his face. Confusion, maybe even recognition. Eli saw it. "You see it, don't you?" he said quietly. "They protect their young like you protected your sister. They love, they grieve, they fight for what they can't afford to lose. They're not monsters, Captain. They're what we were before hate took over." Cole's hand trembled on the trigger. For the first time, he looked less like a hunter and more like a man remembering something he'd spent years trying to forget. Behind him, one of the soldiers spoke nervously. "Sir? Orders?" Cole didn't answer. He lowered the rifle slowly. "No one fires," he said at last. The young soldier blinked. "But Captain—" "I said no one fires," Cole barked, voice breaking like ice. Eli exhaled, the tension draining from his limbs. Greyheart eased back a step, though his eyes never left Cole. The captain looked at the scene before him. The fireless cabin, the battered man, the wounded pup, and for the first time, he seemed lost. He turned to his men. "We're leaving," he said. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, but obeyed. Within moments, they were gone, their hoofbeats fading into the snow. Cole lingered a moment longer in the doorway, eyes meeting Eli's one last time. "You can't save them all," he said softly. "But maybe you just saved me." Then he left. Eli stood there for a long time after, the quiet returning slowly. The pup whimpered and nudged his hand. Greyheart lay beside the fire pit, shoulders heaving. Eli dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering the footprints of men and wolves alike, erasing the evidence of what had just happened, but not the memory. And somewhere deep in the woods, Henry Cole rode through the storm, a question burning in his mind that he could no longer silence. The next day, he would turn his horse back toward the mountains. The storm had passed, but the mountain remained wrapped in quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something sacred or broken, or both. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, clean, untouched, forgiving. Eli Turner stood outside the cabin, the morning light soft against his face. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney behind him, curling into the sky before fading into nothing. Greyheart and Ash played a few yards away. the pup leaping awkwardly through the snow while his father watched with patient amusement. The sight made Eli smile for the first time in days. His body still ached, his hands raw and bruised. But for once, the ache didn't matter. He had survived. They all had. He reached down to scoop a handful of snow, rubbing it against his palm to numb the sting of an old cut. The world smelled of pine and smoke, life and silence, a mixture that felt like peace. But peace on this mountain never lasted long. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. "You're up early," a voice said. Eli turned. Jonas Reed stood there, bundled in his ranger coat, face wind-burned and weary but smiling faintly. "Didn't expect you to come up this far," Eli said. Jonas stepped outside, crunching through the snow. "Didn't have a choice. The town's buzzing. Folks say Captain Cole packed up his post and headed east." Left without orders, Eli nodded slowly. "He's gone, then." "So it seems." Jonas hesitated, studying the wolves. "And you're still here." Eli looked toward the tree line. "Where else would I go?" Jonas shrugged. "Could go home. Your mother's been asking. Says she'll tan my hide if I come back without you." That drew a quiet laugh from Eli. "That sounds like her." He turned his gaze back to the wolves. Greyheart had moved closer now, standing tall and calm, the sun catching silver in his fur. Ash trotted beside him, his limp barely noticeable anymore. Jonas lowered his voice. "You plan to keep them?" Eli shook his head. "They don't belong to me. I just gave them a chance to belong to the world again." Jonas nodded, thoughtful. "Funny thing," he said after a pause. "When I rode up here, I saw their tracks running side by side with yours. Couldn't tell where the man's ended and the wolf's began." Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how it should be." They stood together in silence, watching as Greyheart and Ash began to climb the ridge. The larger wolf paused at the top, turning to look back. For a long moment, their eyes met, man and beast, bound not by chains, but by something deeper. Then, with a flick of his tail, Greyheart turned and disappeared into the trees, the pup following close behind. Eli exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to take with it everything heavy he'd carried for years. The clearing felt emptier now, but also lighter, like the mountain itself had taken a deep breath and decided to forgive him. Jonas broke the quiet. "You should come down soon. The weather's turning again. And Martha, she's not as strong as she was last winter." Eli nodded. "I'll go. But first, there's something I need to do." He went back inside the cabin, rummaging through his pack until he found the short piece of broken chain he'd carried since the night he freed the wolves. It was cold and rusted, but when he held it up to the light, it gleamed faintly, like it still remembered what it meant to hold and to let go. He stepped outside again, walked to the edge of the frozen stream, and dropped the chain into the water. It vanished beneath the ice, swallowed by the current. Jonas watched silently. "Burying ghosts?" Eli nodded. "All of them." They left the cabin a few hours later, descending the narrow path toward the valley. The wind was gentle now, brushing against their faces like a whisper. Halfway down, Eli stopped and looked back one last time. The ridge stood quiet, snow glinting under the rising sun. Somewhere up there, he imagined Greyheart's call echoing through the trees, a sound not of sorrow, but of gratitude. By the time he reached home, dusk had settled over the land. The cabin's windows glowed softly, and for a moment, Eli thought he saw his mother sitting by the fire, waiting. When he stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around him like a memory. Martha looked up from her chair, eyes bright despite her frailty. "You came back," she whispered. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "I kept my promise." She smiled faintly. "And the wolves?" "Free," he said. "Both of them." Her eyes closed for a moment, a sigh leaving her lips. "Then so are you." They sat together in the quiet, the fire crackling low. Eli felt the weight of the mountains still clinging to him, but softer now, as if transformed into something he could carry without pain. Outside, the first stars began to appear, small, trembling lights scattered across the endless dark. He rose, walked to the window, and looked out toward the horizon. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement along the ridge, two shadows against the snow, vanishing into the trees. He smiled. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered. Behind him, Martha spoke softly. "What was that?" "Nothing," he said, turning back to her with a gentle smile. "Just the wind." She closed her eyes again, resting. The firelight flickered across her face, drawing out the lines of a life lived in faith and patience. Eli watched her breathe, each rise and fall steady, rhythmic, like the mountain itself finding peace. As the night deepened, the wind carried faint echoes down from the ridge. It wasn't the mournful cry of predators or the howl of loneliness. It was something else. A song of the wild, born of survival, of forgiveness, of freedom. Eli listened until it faded, his eyes glistening in the glow of the hearth. Then he whispered, "You were right, Ma. The world always forgives if you give it a reason." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, erasing tracks, covering wounds, turning everything white. And somewhere beyond the ridge, under the same sky, a wolf and his son ran through the wilderness, leaving no chains behind, only the memory of the man who had set them free. That night, as the fire burned low and the storm whispered over the mountain, Eli Turner finally slept, not as a man haunted by his past, but as one who had made peace with it. The wolves' howls rose one last time through the stillness, mingling with the wind, an ending and a beginning all at once. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.